Welcome to the Mad Genius Thesis, the show where we explore the connection between creativity and mental illness.
Yeah.
And this week, we are going to be diving into a story that's so unbelievable.
I know.
You would think it was fiction.
Yeah.
Picture this.
Okay.
A surgeon, haunted by his experiences in the Civil War, locked away in an asylum.
Wow.
But here's the twist. Within those walls, he becomes a key contributor to, get this, the Oxford English Dictionary.
The OED.
Yeah.
It's a story that just grabs you. And it makes you think about the human mind, its potential, and its vulnerabilities. We're talking, of course, about Dr. William Chester Minor.
Yeah, Dr. Minor. His story really is a keyhole into, a world of contradictions.
Right.
And it makes us ask, can genius really thrive in the middle of all that mental turmoil? Was his dedication to words, like his escape, or even a kind of therapy?
Interesting.
To understand this, we have to go back to the beginning.
Okay.
Dr. Minor's early life.
Uh-huh.
He was born in Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka. Right. And he experienced this incredible mix of languages and cultures from when he was really young.
It makes you wonder how those early experiences might have shaped his path.
Yeah.
I mean, being exposed to all those different languages, that can leave a mark. Maybe even spark a passion for words later on.
Yeah.
But we can't ignore the impact of trauma on his life.
Right.
Especially his time as a surgeon in the Civil War.
The Battle of the Wilderness. That was a turning point.
Absolutely.
Just imagine the suffering he witnessed.
The
The constant pressure, the impossible decisions he had to make. It's understandable that he carried that with him for the rest of his life.
Civil War left deep psychological scars on so many people. Minor was no different. You see signs of maybe PTSD, the guilt from branding a deserter.
Wow.
It all fed into this growing paranoia,
Oh.
fear of Irishmen, which stemmed from that incident.
So we have this brilliant mind battling these inner demons, and yet his intellect was so sharp. It's like his mind was searching for refuge in the world of words.
It's fascinating.
But how does he go from a surgeon in the Civil War to a major contributor to the Oxford English Dictionary while he's locked up in an asylum?
Well, after the war, Minor's mental health declined.
Oh.
His behavior became erratic, with obsessive tendencies,
Wow.
and he was diagnosed with what was then called monomania.
Monomania.
Yeah, for our listeners, it was a term they used in the 19th century to describe what we now might call a delusional disorder.
So like a hyper-focus on a certain idea or fear?
Exactly. And sadly, this monomania led to a tragedy.
Uh-huh.
Minor, caught in his delusions, he killed a man named George Merritt.
Oh, no.
And this led to his confinement in Broadmoor Asylum, a high-security institution for the criminally insane.
Quite a change from being a Yale-educated surgeon.
Yeah.
So how does the Oxford English Dictionary, this huge project, how does that fit in with Minor being confined?
It's a strange twist of fate. At the same time that Minor is in Broadmoor, we have this group of scholars,
Okay.
the Philological Society. They were beginning this incredible project, creating the Oxford English Dictionary. A dictionary unlike any other.
What made the OED so different?
Well, previous dictionaries were limited in scope, But the Philological Society, they wanted something much bigger. They wanted to document the whole history of the English language.
Wow.
Trace the evolution of words right back to their earliest roots. They wanted a truly democratic dictionary, one that relied heavily on volunteers from all walks of life.
So they crowdsourced the English language before crowdsourcing was even a thing.
Exactly. They asked for volunteers to read, collect quotations that showed how words were used, and send them in on slips of paper.
Wow.
And this is where Dr. Minor, looking for redemption, some intellectual stimulation in Broadmoor, comes in.
Driven by a need to make things right, maybe?
Maybe. Or maybe he was just drawn to the challenge, the sheer size of the project. Whatever the reason, he became a dedicated volunteer reader for the OED, pouring all his energy and intellect into this task.
Okay, but wasn't there a whole, romanticized story about how Minor got involved with the OPD?
Yes.
Like, didn't the editor of the dictionary, James Murray, discover that Minor was in an asylum?
Yeah, that's a popular story,
Right.
But it's more fiction than fact. Actually, Murray learned about Minor's situation from an American librarian.
Oh, really?
Yeah, before they ever met.
Oh, wow. So no big reveal there.
Yeah.
But they did eventually meet face to face, right?
She did, and it's actually a pretty interesting part of the story.
Okay.
Even though it was such an unusual situation, Murray had a lot of respect for Miner's intelligence and the huge value of his work. And they started writing letters back and forth. At first, it was all about, lexicography, all the details of words and how they're used.
This shared passion for language really bridged the gap between a well-known scholar and a man confined to an asylum.
Yeah, exactly. Their letters, they started to get more personal over time. You can see a real bond forming through their love of language.
Yeah.
And they even met up a few times at Broadmoor.
Can you imagine those meetings? Two brilliant minds connected by this massive project.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if working together like that gave Miner a purpose, maybe even some comfort while he was dealing with his struggles.
That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
It gets to the heart of what we're talking about here, the idea that being intellectually engaged could be therapeutic. Could Miner's focus on the OED, on all those tiny details of language, have been like an anchor for him in the storm of his illness?
It's like his mind found a way to create order in the middle of chaos by focusing on this really demanding intellectual task.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about thousands of quotations, all researched so carefully and written out by hand on slips of paper.
Miner's dedication was incredible, especially with all the challenges he was facing.
Yeah.
His work was so important to the OED. It gave them so many historical examples that showed how words changed over time.
It's a real testament to the resilience of the human spirit,
Yeah.
finding focus and meaning, even when things are so difficult.
It is.
But what about Miner himself? Did his condition ever get any better?
Well,
Was he ever able to leave Broadmoor?
Miner's mental state, it went up and down throughout his time there.
Oh.
There were times when he was lucid and incredibly productive, like we see with his work on the dictionary.
Right.
But there were also times of intense delusion and distress.
A constant battle between brilliance and darkness.
Yeah.
So were there any attempts to get him released?
There were, and this is where this story takes another turn.
Okay.
His brother Alfred, he fought really hard to get him released and brought back to the United States. And believe it or not, Winston Churchill, who was the Home Secretary at the time, got involved in the case.
Winston Churchill. That's unexpected.
It is a bit surprising.
Yeah.
Churchill's mother was American, so he had a soft spot for Americans. And he helped to arrange for Miner to be released on parole in 1910.
Wow.
But the condition was that he had to leave the UK permanently.
So after nearly 40 years in Broadmoor, Miner finally went back to America.
Yeah.
Did his mental health improve when he got back to familiar surroundings?
Sadly, no.
Oh.
He was relieved to be back in the U.S.,
Yeah.
but his mental health problems continued.
Oh, no.
He ended up being admitted to St. Elizabeth's Hospital,
Mm.
a mental institution in Washington, D.C., and he spent the rest of his life there.
It's heartbreaking that even with his achievements and the people who cared about him, he never really found peace from his illness.
It is a tragic part of his story.
Yeah.
But there's another layer to Miner's mental health journey that we need to look at.
Okay.
At St. Elizabeth's, he was diagnosed with what they called back then dementia precox.
Dementia precox.
Today we know it as schizophrenia.
So the monomania diagnosis wasn't quite right.
Oh.
His condition was much more complicated than that.
Exactly. This later diagnosis, it gives us a new perspective on how severe and complex Miner's struggles really were. It helps us understand just how much he was dealing with throughout his life.
And it makes his dedication to the Oxford English Dictionary even more amazing.
Right.
To do what he did while dealing with such a serious illness, it's incredible.
It speaks to the power of the human mind.
Yeah.
To find focus and purpose even when you're going through such intense mental anguish.
And it brings us back to our main question, the connection between creativity and mental illness.
Exactly.
We can't say for sure whether his illness fueled his creativity, but it's clear that working on the OED gave him a sense of purpose,
Yeah,
a refuge from his inner turmoil.
it's true.
It makes you wonder, could focusing on something so intellectually demanding, requiring such attention to detail, could that have actually helped him manage his mental struggles?
That's a fascinating question and a complicated one. Some people believe that mental illness can actually boost creativity, while others see them as separate things that just happen to exist together.
Yeah.
Miner's story doesn't give us definite answers,
Right.
but it's a really interesting case study.
It also reminds us how important empathy and understanding are when it comes to mental illness.
Absolutely.
This was a man who was considered criminally insane,
Right.
yet he contributed so much to our understanding of language.
He did.
His story challenges us to look beyond labels and see the worth and potential in everyone.
I agree with that. And it's important to remember that while we're so drawn to Dr. Miner's story, There's another side to this tragedy. A victim whose story often gets overlooked.
Right.
We need to acknowledge George Merritt, the man Miner killed during a period of delusion.
You're right. It's easy to focus on the incredible parts of this story.
Yeah.
But we can't forget the human cost of what happened.
No.
George Merritt was an innocent man.
He was.
A working-class father just trying to provide for his family.
Yeah.
His death was devastating for his wife and children.
It was.
And we have to acknowledge the impact this had on their lives.
It's a serious reminder that every life has value and meaning, and that the effects of violence, especially when it's driven by mental illness, they go far beyond the act itself.
That's a good point. It highlights the complexity of this case.
It does.
We can be amazed by Miner's brilliance and resilience.
Yes.
But we also have to recognize the tragic impact his illness had on others.
Exactly. It emphasizes the need for compassion and understanding for those struggling with mental illness and for those whose lives are touched by it. It's a delicate balance, acknowledging the brilliance and the devastation, the genius and the madness that can exist together in a human being.
This deep dive into Dr. Miner's life has been really eye-opening.
Yeah.
He was a man of contradictions, a brilliant mind struggling with a fragmented mental state,
Right.
a gifted surgeon, haunted by war, a criminal who found a way to redeem himself through words.
His story encourages us to confront our own biases, to appreciate the power of words.
And to approach mental illness with both curiosity and compassion.
We've explored Dr. Miner's life, his contributions to the OED, the complexities of his mental illness, and the tragic consequences of his actions.
Yeah.
But as we move towards the end of our discussion, there's one last piece of this puzzle I want to look at.
Okay, what are you thinking?
Well, we've talked about how working on the dictionary might have been therapeutic for Miner, but could there be another side to that? Could his intense focus on words, his attention to every little detail, could that have actually been a symptom of his illness?
That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
It takes us back to that age-old debate about genius and madness.
Yeah.
Could his obsession with language have been more of a symptom than a solution?
Yeah. It's a question that's fascinated people for a really long time.
It has.
Is there this blurry line between brilliance and madness? You know? Could mental illness actually fuel creativity in some way?
Yeah.
Or are they just two separate things that exist in the same person? It's a debate that we might never fully solve.
Right.
But cases like Dr. Miner's, they definitely give us a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Was his really precise approach to language a way of self-medicating almost? A way to create order when the world felt so chaotic?
Yeah.
Or was his talent for language just a separate part of him completely unrelated to his illness?
It's really hard to separate the two, isn't it?
It is.
And maybe that's the whole point. The human mind is so complex.
Yeah.
Trying to put it into neat categories oversimplifies things.
I think you're right. We try to make things fit into boxes.
Yeah.
But in Miner's case, we see brilliance, obsession, tragedy all mixed together. It reminds us that human experience isn't always so black and white.
It also shows how important it is to approach mental illness with understanding and compassion.
Absolutely.
We can recognize the destructive parts of Miner's illness,
Yes.
but at the same time celebrate what he achieved for our understanding of language.
And speaking of the Oxford English Dictionary,
Yeah.
it's worth remembering just how ambitious that project was.
It was huge.
Thousands of volunteers, all connected by their love of language, contributing to this massive undertaking.
It really shows the power of collective knowledge.
Yeah.
And how fascinated we are by words and where they come from.
It does.
It makes you think about how they actually did it.
Right.
I mean, compiling all those words and definitions, it must have been a nightmare to organize.
It was a really intricate process.
Yeah.
We might even think it's old-fashioned today. Just picture mountains of paper slips, each one with a quote showing how a word was used. Volunteers read through so many texts, carefully copying and sending in these examples.
It was like a giant pre-digital database.
Exactly, organized completely by hand.
And Dr. Miner was a vital part of that process, all while he was in an asylum.
He was.
It speaks volumes about his intellect, his perseverance,
Yes.
and maybe even his need to find meaning and purpose in the middle of his own internal struggles.
It really is an amazing story.
It is.
And it's one that's still resonating with people over a century later. Miner's life has inspired books, articles, even a film.
Wow.
It seems like we can't get enough of this story of brilliance, madness, and the power of words.
It's a story that needs to be told and retold.
Yeah.
Not just for its connection to the Oxford English Dictionary,
Right.
but for what it tells us about what it means to be human.
It does.
It challenges us to question our own assumptions,
Right.
to appreciate the power of language,
Yes.
and to approach mental illness with empathy and a sense of wonder.
Dr. William Chester, minor surgeon, soldier, scholar, prisoner.
Yeah.
His life was full of contrasts.
It was.
It reminds us that the human mind can be both incredibly creative and incredibly fragile.
As we wrap up our deep dive into his life, we're left with this thought-provoking question. Maybe the true measure of a life isn't just about what we achieve,
Yeah.
but about the impact we have on others, even in unexpected ways.
That's a beautiful thought. A perfect way to end our discussion. Dr. Miner's story shows us the strength of the human spirit, how complex our minds are, and the legacy we leave behind through both our actions and our words.
Thank you for joining us on the Mad Genius Thesis. We hope exploring Dr. Miner's life has made you curious and left you thinking about the link between creativity and the human mind.
It has been fascinating.
Until next time, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep searching for those hidden connections that make life so interesting.